and the lifter of my head. Thou art my glory, the lifter of my head. You are my glory and the lifter of my head. For thou, O God, art a shield to me, my glory. You are the lifter of my head. Exceedingly, abundantly, above and beyond, you do exceedingly, abundantly, above and beyond. Your works are exceedingly, abundantly, above all my hopes. Be exalted. Your grace is exceedingly, it is abundantly, above all my dreams. Your works are exceedingly, abundantly, above all my thoughts. You do exceedingly, abundantly, above all my hopes. Be exalted forever and always. Lord, be exalted forever and always. Be thou exalted forever and always. Be exalted. Be magnified forever and always. Father, be thou magnified forever and always. Be magnified forever and always. Oh God, be exalted. You are my glory, the lifter of my head. Thou art my glory and the lifter of my head. lifter of my head.
Good evening, blessed viewer, in the mighty name of Jesus. Hallelujah, the Lord is good. Welcome to you all to UBNT live broadcast, and to all of you who are connected on UBN TV. Special greetings to you all, and to everyone who is connected on the website, on the UBN app. Be greeted in the mighty name of Jesus. And to you all on Facebook, be greeted as well in the mighty name of Jesus. The Lord is good, the Lord is wonderful, and we thank Him so much that we are connected once more, and we appreciate God for this grace for this time. And right now, I'm just going to ask you, wherever you are, to bow your head so that we can just thank the Lord that we are connected in the mighty name of Jesus. Father, Lord, we thank you so much that you have connected us, and here we are about to discuss matters that concern our lives, and our lives are in your hands. Father, lead this broadcast, lead the discussions in the mighty name of Jesus. Father God, we thank you for the presence of your Holy Ghost. In Jesus' name, Lord, we thank you, we appreciate you. Amen. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. It is wonderful to be connected to you this Monday night, and it is great to see that you are connected. I can see that you are online. Some of you, those who are on Facebook, I can see you. Boshonisani Leraton Dibuo, Melina, Nora Masina. Hey, feel so welcomed to this broadcast, all of you. And it is very good that you have connected. And right now, what I'm going to ask you to do is for you to just share the broadcast. Share the broadcast with other people so that they can know that we are online right now. Be sharing the broadcast. Share to as many people as you can. Just spread the word, because here we are here, we are talking about matters concerning our lives. We need to talk about matters that relate to our existence, our lives. And it's very important that we all participate. It's very, very important. And let me say that following the discussion that we had last Monday with the MEC of Health from Limpopo, Dr. Ramathuba, and also the MEC of Health from Gauteng province, the two MECs who were with us, Dr. Mukhuba as well. We learned quite a lot, but there were other questions that were not really responded to, and I'm happy that the MEC said to us that some of these questions they need the specialists, they need your researchers, they need the scientists to can be able to answer some of the things, to address some of these issues. We know that COVID-19 has been with us for many months now, and bringing a lot of change in our lives, and our lives are affected. There is no one who can claim that they are not affected by this COVID-19, and we know that we had to adjust quite quickly, and we had to change many things in order to can be able to cope with whatever that is going on around us. And it hasn't been easy for many people. I mean, there are many people who got sick, there are many people who lost their loved ones, and there are many people who lost their jobs, and it has been tough on everyone. That is why we see that it's very important that we pay attention and we discuss these issues, because we cannot just let them be without us really paying attention and giving them the attention that they deserve. And now I know that most of you who have joined, you are church people, and you have been out of your churches for quite a long time now, because I appreciate the Lord that this is happening. And I know that some of you, you have got burning questions that you have been having. So we have got our experts here, because knowledge is power. We need to be educated. This is what we have been saying, that yes, to the men on the ground, these issues do not make sense. We need to be educated so that we make informed decisions. Right now we are talking about COVID-19 vaccines that are rolled out, and there are many people who are asking, what are these vaccines? What is in these vaccines? How are these vaccines going to affect our lives? How are they going to help us? These are questions that we have, and I'm happy to say to you that we have got experts tonight whom you are going to be able to ask your questions to. And here with me, I've got a man of God. I've got Apostle Makwati from Believers Center. And Apostle Makwati, welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Mama, woman of God, Pastor Mukhuba. And let me greet you and greet all the wonderful viewers of UBN channel at homes, wherever they are watching from. It's such a joy for me to be here tonight. I believe it's going to be a great time of learning, sharing information, and a great time indeed of revealing some things that are, I believe, are important for our lives as we are grappling with this pandemic and the things that are happening in our time. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Apostle. Thank you. And tonight is a special night. We are also joined by viewers of Loving Life Community TV from Australia. So they are joining us as well. So this broadcast will be going to many, many people around the world. And we thank God for that, because what we are going through now is affecting people all over the world, not just people in our country or in our region, but people all over the world. And let me acknowledge the presence of our specialists who honored our invite, and they are with us, joining us. We have got Professor SHABIR MADHI, the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Witwatersrand, and he has been leading COVID-19 vaccine trials in South Africa, doing a lot of research. So we are gonna hear from him tonight, and we are happy that he has joined us. And we have got Professor Berry Shoup. I hope that I'm pronouncing his surname right, because I've been asking, how do I pronounce this? So Professor Berry is the chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Vaccines. And we welcome you. We are excited that he is with us. And we also have Professor HELEN REES. Professor HELEN REES is chairperson of SAHPRA. Most of you, maybe you didn't know what SAHPRA is, or you haven't heard about SAHPRA till recently when we're talking about vaccines. So now we know all these bodies, and we are happy to have you here, Professor REES. Welcome to this broadcast. And we have got Dr. VONGANI MUTHAMBI, a virologist at NHLS. You are going to know all these bodies, you are going to know all these establishments these days, because that is what we are talking about every day. That is what we are reading about. This is what we are watching even on our TV screens. So here are our specialists. We have got them, and I'm just going to start with the apostle. To say apostle, we have got our specialists with us tonight, which is very, very exciting. So I know that church people have been asking about the vaccines. Church people also have concerns about what is going on about COVID-19. And Apostle, I'm happy that you are here so that you can be able to talk to the specialists and also the viewers about the concerns that people of the church have, because you interact with many servants of God, you interact with many church-going people. You can take over.
Thank you so much, Mama. And once again, let me salute and greet all our panel, the experts. It's really a joy to have them with us tonight in this program. And we had a wonderful time last week. I believe it was last week when we had the part one, or a first episode of this topic. And I am coming from the body, or I'm coming from the church at large, and I am representing all Christians that are out there. Now, there is a perception about Christians when it relates to this issue of the vaccines. I want to state it up front that we are, number one, the citizens of this country, and we want to understand everything that is going on and be part of it. And not only to be part of it, but we want to contribute as the Christian leadership as well, positively to what is going on. As it is right now, as a nation or as a global community, we are battling with this pandemic, which has devastated the lives of many people. And right now we have the vaccines being rolled out, and we do not want any hesitation. We want the vaccine which is believed to be the solution to the pandemic that we are faced with. We want it to roll without any hindrances. But before we have a smooth rollout, there are questions, pertinent questions that we have as a church. And I do want to say this as well to everybody watching tonight, that many people, they think just because somebody else is vaccinated, definitely I should go and vaccinate without me understanding what I'm getting myself into. So this platform, I appreciate greatly Pastor Mukhuba for opening this platform. Last time I said it's long overdue indeed. It's a platform for us to learn, especially when we have the experts, to ask important questions. And we are expecting answers tonight. We are expecting direct answers, answers that are going to be put in a simple way, that an ordinary gogo, an ordinary mama mkhulu that is sitting at home watching this program can understand what we are talking about. And as well, we have lots of rumors that are out there. I want to first clarify the rumor of the 666 story, because many people, when they deal with the church as it relates to the vaccines, they say, many people, they think this is a 666 or it's a mark of the beast or an antichrist. I want to say this: from all the interactions that I have had with the pastors, many pastors, we do have those few, but many pastors in general, they are not opposed to the idea of a vaccine. Not at all. Some pastors have even opened up their churches to assist the rollout of this vaccine so that we can get as many citizens as possible to be vaccinated. And many people have seen different pastors as well vaccinating themselves and even taking pictures. And after taking those pictures, they're encouraging people to go out and vaccinate in numbers. And but we still have a lot of unanswered questions, and some of them we stated last week in that episode. So I am hopeful that tonight we are going to get them answered, and we are going to share the information. And I do want to state this, Pastor Mukhuba and the viewers at home, without of course repeating what we said last time, because last time we did complain about the information, many churches, many Christian communities, they don't have information. It's only people speaking on TV. We are people on the ground. Yes, we do have these regulations that restrict us from gathering in numbers, but in these ways that we gather, we want to share the information. There is a certain meeting with the clergy early on before the rollout of this vaccine, if you remember very well. I believe it was in Pretoria. And precisely there was a bishop there that said something that was very important at that time. He said, before you roll out the vaccines, take us into confidence as the clergy. Clear the questions that we might have. Because he even stated this. He said the church is not only a place for us to come and worship, but it is also a platform to disseminate information to the public, because we are the people that work with the public. But I know that the authorities that are there, maybe they didn't take that call seriously. As a result, they went ahead with the rollout, and you know, there was a lot of resistance, particularly from some parts of the Christian community, precisely because they have so many questions. So we do have questions, and then we are going to listen carefully as the experts are clearing those questions, explaining to us what this virus is about, what the vaccines do to the virus, and the safety of these vaccines together with their efficacy. Are they really effective? Didn't we have any other alternative to a vaccine? These vaccines have been rushed in a space of 9 months. They were produced and they were available by the month of December. You know that this pandemic broke out beginning of the year, but by the month of December, they were already administered first in the USA. So in 9 months they were here, which is unprecedented. It's something that has never happened before. So I will just listen for now and hear what the experts are saying, and then I will engage them as we move along with the program.
Thank you very much, Apostle. Thank you very much. So what I heard you saying is that there is a perception that maybe church people are against vaccines, and that is not really true.
Not true at all.
We want to work together with our government. We want to work together to do what is right for the nation. And it can be very dangerous to reject what you don't know or to accept what you don't know. There has to be education first and understanding first, and then we then get to know what is this that we are dealing with. And there is something that you said, what is this virus about? What is this virus about? What is this virus in actual fact? What is it? And for that, I'm gonna go straight to Dr. Muthambi. Dr. Muthambi, I'm gonna go straight to you now so that you can be able to educate the people about this virus. Welcome to you, Doctor, and we are very excited to have you tonight on UBN TV. You can take over.
All the pastors and the bishops, our professors, very SCHOUB, who taught me, and our wonderful viewers at home. Thank you for having me, and I'm really humbled to be here. So I will just start with the basics, and hopefully when we get to speak about vaccines, you would be understanding what COVID-19 is. I'm Dr. VONGANI MUTHAMBI. I'm a clinical pathologist. I'm a clinical virologist, a pathologist at Polokwane NHLS. Before I can go on, I just want to say a disclaimer. Whatever that I say here is my view as a pathologist. It's not representing NHLS. So briefly, my duties as a pathologist is that I'm a link between the patient, the doctor, and the laboratory or the clinician. So my responsibilities is to make sure that the samples that we take from the patients is transported accurately, gets to the lab, and still in good quality. It's registered, the correct name, the correct patient, and the correct test that has been requested. And after that, we ensure that we test the sample, and we don't just use our own standards, we are using international standards. So the results that you get from a sample that has been tested, it goes through the hands of many different people who are working in the lab, and those people are qualified. So I'll just go basically very quickly to what a virus is. I believe we need to understand just a few concepts, then it will be easier to understand the vaccines. So viruses are very small parasites which live inside the cell. This is very important as we speak about the different vaccines because, for example, your Pfizer vaccine, it has to go inside the cell. So what they do, the vaccines, the viruses, they take over the control of the cell, and they instruct the cell to make proteins and genes that can help them continue to replicate. By replication, look at it as if they are making their own copies of the baby viruses. And during this process, there is a lot of mistakes that can be made. And some of these mistakes, they can be beneficial to the virus. For example, with our COVID, we end up having variants, or they can be non-beneficial to the virus. And unfortunately, what we're facing now, the mutations that the virus is gaining, which are the errors that it makes during replication, is end up being beneficial for it. And it changes some of the characteristics of the virus, and it ends up being infectious. So if there is nothing to control the virus inside the cell, it will continue replicating, produce its little babies, move on to the next cell, and the process just continues. As the virus do that, some of these viruses can be, they can cause severe damage to the cell. So if there is no immune response, which is like the army of the body, then the virus will just continue replicating and it cannot be controlled. Now, in the body, we have the army. And I love saying that the simple way to look at it is that this defense force of the body can be divided into two. You can look at it as if it's the defense force, the army on the ground that protect the land. It's very non-specific. Whatever it can be called to go and assist with problems or riots. It's not only about war. Then you also have the specific one, which you can look at it as either the Navy or the Air Force. This one is very specific. It looks at a target and it shoots at the target. So this is the part where antibodies comes in, because antibodies are created by our body and in response to the virus or any microorganism that is in the body or a foreign matter. For example, if it's a foreign matter, you can have allergies. But this response that we get from viruses, because we're talking about viruses today, or any infectious agent, the second part of the immune system, which is specific, like the Air Force, it keeps the memory. If it comes again in future, or it encounters again the same virus in future, it will be able to produce those antibodies, which are very specific and shoot straight at the target. This is very important because we need to know how the body responds to the vaccine. Now, before I can continue, the COVID-19 disease is caused by a SARS-CoV-2 virus. This virus is similar to the virus that caused an outbreak in China in 2002, 2003. It's similar to the virus that caused MERS, which is the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which occurred in between 2012 and 2015. So these viruses, they are a group of coronaviruses. Most of them that we used to have, they used to cause mild respiratory infections. And we were not paying too much attention to them the same way we were paying to influenza, which is the flu virus that we usually vaccinate for every year, especially people with comorbidities. That has been happening for a long time. Now, with this SARS-CoV-2, it's not similar to the normal seasonal coronavirus. It's quite different because it behaves like the SARS and the MERS that I've discussed. And due to this mutation and other processes which are used by the virus to evolve, we end up having the virus moving from animals to humans. And unfortunately, when that happens, the body of the host or the humans does not have any antibodies or any immunity that can protect them from the new virus. This is exactly what is happening with the COVID-19. So we always speak about the incubation period. This is the period from which one is exposed with the virus up until the time when one has symptoms. For example, with influenza, the incubation period is a day or two. With SARS-CoV-2, the incubation period is up to 14 days with an average of 5 to 7 days. So it means that you can be exposed for 2 weeks and the symptoms can only start 2 weeks later. So this is also very important because sometimes when you go back and try to look at the people who have been infected, you also have to look at the list of all the people you were close with or your close contacts, and it doesn't only go back to day 1 or day 2 before you were diagnosed, so that they can also quarantine if they were very close contacts, and they can also have the chance to test themselves, to go and test if they develop symptoms. Now, with this incubation period, it's quite a challenge because it's very long. And secondly, certain patients, majority of patients, when they get infected, they might not have symptoms. So they are asymptomatic. But there are those who will have symptoms and they will get better, flu-like symptoms, and they will get better with time. But unfortunately, those with comorbidities, meaning with other diseases or underlying diseases as well, such as diabetes and hypertension, they stand a chance of being severely ill, and they end up in the hospital, admitted, and they will end up needing incubators. So for now, this is where I will end. And if there are any questions, you will guide me on how to proceed.
Dr. MUTHAMBI, the NHLS, what exactly do you do? Yourselves, what is it that you do in is it your labs? What is it that you do? Oh,
Sorry, I see that I've...
Can you hear me? All right, what I was saying was that what exactly do you do as the NHLS? What is your role in this whole thing of the viruses, the vaccines? You say that you are in the laboratories, I believe. So what is your role there? What is your role in this whole thing that is happening right now?
So basically my duties, like I said, I'm the link between the patient and the clinician. I have to ensure that the sample that we receive, meaning the swab in this instant, is kept correctly, transported correctly to the laboratory, if maybe it's coming from the clinic or even if it's from the hospital, from the wards, sent to the laboratory properly. And when it's received, it must not just lie there. We have to make sure that there are ways and protocols that we follow in order to make sure that when we test the virus, we are able to detect it. Now,
in other words, you are assuring us that you guys are doing your tests properly. These results are not cooked up, they are real.
Yes. And these results are of quality standards. There are standards that we have to follow in each and every laboratory. Like I said, I cannot just wake up and decide I want to set up a lab and I'll just set it up in any room. We have to follow temperature, cleaning procedures, how we set up our instruments, and how we make sure that the instruments that we receive, even if the manufacturer says they are fit for purpose, we also test them in a specific way. I'll give an example with last year when Corona started. On Good Friday, I was at Mankweng Hospital and we were preparing to make sure that the machines that we were going to use for this COVID are working accurately. And usually we refer to it as a very valid validation of the instrument or the. So we have to use samples which are positive and samples which are negative. So we have to use known samples. I remember on Good Friday when I had to open the first positive sample that I had received from Joburg. It was quite scary, but it had to be done, and also to show the other staff how they should continue with the procedure. And once the machine has met the standards or given us the results that are accurate, then we can proceed testing. So we don't just go and pick up any machine, regardless of whether we are the laboratory that serves the government, like the NLS, or if it's a private institution. There are very strict guidelines that needs to be followed.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. In other words, the doctor is telling us that the virus is there, the virus is real. It's not just a cooked up story, because there are those questions. Do we really have a coronavirus? Is it real? So the doctor is saying yes, the virus is there, they are doing their tests, and she says that they do their tests properly. And now I'm gonna move and go to another specialist who is with us. I'm gonna be going to Professor MADHI, and Professor MADHI has been leading in COVID-19 vaccine trials here in South Africa. I've been checking his work. He has done quite a lot of work, and I believe that tonight he's going to be educating us regarding what he does, because what he does impacts on my life, upon my life, and upon your life. Over to you, Professor MADHI.
Good evening. Pastor, and thank you for inviting us to this session, a really important session. And a shout out to you and the rest of the pastors for actually being so proactive in engaging with the scientists so that we can get our communities to better understand what vaccines are all about. So as you mentioned, I'm at the University of Witwatersrand, and in addition to being the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences, I also lead a research unit which is mainly focused on what we call the clinical development of vaccines. That is, we look at different vaccines to see whether the vaccines are firstly safe, and if they are safe, whether they actually work in protecting against the illness that we're targeting. So I've been involved in this work for the past 25 years, since 1997. And since 1997, we have done a number of different studies in South Africa, mainly initially in children, to look at vaccines which would aim to try to protect children from developing severe infections of the lung, which is otherwise known as pneumonia, or to prevent children from developing a runny stomach, otherwise known as diarrheal disease. And there are two in particular that we looked previously, and what we had shown at an example, the one vaccine is the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, which prevents pneumonia. And because the studies were done in South Africa actually became one of the first countries on the entire African continent to introduce that vaccine into our childhood immunization program. So if anyone has got a child, you would know that you take the children 10 weeks, 14 weeks in South Africa to get vaccines. And one of the vaccines that they do get is this vaccine known as the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, which protects them from developing infections in the lung as well as infections around the brain. The other vaccine is known as rotavirus vaccine, which is a vaccine that's given in the mouth. It's not given as an injection. And it's 1 or 2 drops of that vaccine that's given. And that vaccine helps young children, especially children under 1 year of age. It protects them from ending up in hospital with diarrheal disease, with runny stomach, which can cause children to die. So each year in South Africa alone, as an example, the use of just these 2 vaccines in South Africa saves between 5,000 and 7,000 children from dying. Before these vaccines were introduced, that to the number of children that would have died from pneumonia and diarrheal disease, which are now prevented with the vaccines. So what I've done then is that we've been looking at the number of other vaccines, and obviously over the past 15 months or so, we've been primarily focused on the COVID-19 vaccines. And as you indicated, my research unit did the first 2 studies on the entire African continent of COVID-19 vaccines. Now, when we look at vaccines, the type of studies that we do is we firstly, again, important to emphasize, the most important part of a study is to know that a vaccine is safe. Even before investigating whether the vaccine actually protects people from developing COVID-19, we need to understand that these vaccines are safe before we start infecting many people. So how do we go about doing these studies? Before the vaccines are approved by SAHPRA as an example, we have to do a number of different steps to see whether these vaccines work and whether they're safe. And the best way to do this, we can understand how it works, is that we take a large number of people and we randomly, like flipping a coin, decide whether a person is going to get the vaccine or whether a person is going to get something like salt water, an injection just of salt water. So we have these 2 groups of people, and neither us as investigators or the participants, the people that are volunteering to be part of the study, will know which arm they are in, whether they received the vaccine or whether they received the salt water. What we then do is that we follow up these individuals and we document everything that happens to them. Even if they knocked over by a car, as an example, we would record that in our paperwork. If they end up in hospital for any reason, we would record that in our paperwork. And if they are ill, then we would investigate them, test them to see if they got COVID-19 or not, and we would record all of that information. Now, at the end of the study, what would happen is that we will have 2 groups. The one group that received the vaccine and the other group that received the saline, as an example, the salt water as an example. And we compare the difference between these 2 groups for everything that might have happened. We also compare, as an example, where there's any difference between the 2 groups and the number of people that were involved in a motor vehicle accident. And obviously, we don't expect the vaccine to protect against a motor vehicle accident, so we expect the same numbers of people in each of those 2 groups to have been involved in a motor vehicle accident, as an example. But what we also look at is we look at whether there's any other medical conditions that people might have been hospitalized for. And again, we look at what percentage in each group were hospitalized for any particular medical condition. And usually for most of the medical conditions, unless it's related to the germ that we're trying to fight, we would find that there's no difference between the two groups. So that helps us to understand that this vaccine is actually safe, that you're not getting, as an example, more skin rashes in a one group compared to another group, or you're not, or some people are not having a stroke in a one group, and that's more than in other group, which might not be related to the germ, but might be a side effect of the vaccine. So at the end of these studies, what we can show is that these two groups are very, very similar. The reasons why they're being hospitalized is very similar, but where they do differ usually, when a vaccine starts working, is that they differ in terms of what percentage in each group will end up in hospital with COVID-19 as an example, or what percentage in each group will test positive for the virus when they have any signs or symptoms suggestive of COVID-19. So as an example, what can happen between the two groups is that in a one group, maybe 1% of the people develop COVID-19, and that is in a vaccine group, and in the other group, 10% of people, 10 out of every 100 people develop COVID-19. So when we do compare these two groups, the one group has got 1 out of every 10 people that has developed COVID, 1 out of every 100 people that have developed COVID-19. The other group has got 10 out of every 100 people that have developed COVID-19, and that tells us now that when you give someone a vaccine, they're 90% less likely to develop COVID-19. So out of every 10 people, as an example, that will be infected, if you receive the vaccine, only one person might develop COVID-19 compared to 9 out of the other 10 people that were in the other group. So the differences between these groups is such that it helps us to understand, firstly, whether the vaccines are safe, and secondly, whether the vaccines actually protect against COVID-19. So that is when we do clinical trials. Now, it is only after the vaccines are tested in tens of thousands of people, and for many of the COVID-19 vaccines, before the vaccines are approved for use by organizations such as SAHPRA and other organizations, they need to submit to SAHPRA the information, the evidence that these vaccines are safe, that they don't do harm, and that these vaccines actually work, and it actually protects people against the germ that you're trying to fight off. And it's only after that information is provided to SAHPRA and other regulatory authorities throughout the world. And those studies usually involve anything between 30 and 40,000 people. So with that large number of people, as an example, 20,000 in each group will either receive the vaccine or they'll receive the saltwater injection, and they compare those two groups. And with that type of evidence, SAHPRA is then able to make a decision as to whether the vaccines are safe and whether the vaccines work in protecting against COVID-19. Now, you also correctly stated that usually it takes almost 9 to 10 years for vaccines to be developed. But with COVID-19, these vaccines have been developed in less than 1 year, in around about 10 months, in fact. So why is it such a big difference between how fast COVID-19 have been developed and how long it usually takes for vaccines to be developed? The main reason for that is that much of the technology that has been used to develop COVID-19 vaccines is not technology that is new to us. It's technology that has been in existence for a long, long time. So the doctor that I just spoke as an example mentioned that in addition to COVID-19, there were 2 other viruses very similar to the COVID-19 virus, known as SARS and MERS virus. Now, the scientists already in 2002 were trying to develop vaccines against the SARS virus. And in 2010-11, they were trying to develop a vaccine against the MERS virus. So what they did is that they used the same sort of technology, and what they were able to do is manipulate it very quickly and to put a new sort of target into this technology so that we can develop a vaccine against COVID-19. So what he did is that all of the learning, all of the experience they had since 2002 for as an example, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, all of the learnings they've had since 2002, they didn't require vaccines against those other germs because those other germs largely disappeared. But they were able to now use that technology and over a very short period of time, adapt the technology, change the technology, and make the technology to target the new germ, which was COVID-19. So they were able to quickly redesign what they were using previously against COVID-19. Now, in addition to that, unlike in the past, where the companies usually need to put in the money to produce these vaccines, and the companies are very cautious. They usually take baby steps from one stage to another stage to another stage before they eventually say, now we've got the vaccine to work. And the reason for that is that it becomes very expensive to produce these vaccines. At the end of the day, it will cost as much as $1 billion to produce one vaccine, from the time of discovering of the vaccine to the time when it's actually licensed for use. So companies are usually very cautious in terms of making sure that before they go to the next step that this vaccine is going to work. What happened with COVID-19 is that scientists from around the world came together to start to focus only on a single thing. Scientists that were working for vaccines against HIV, against tuberculosis, against malaria, against pneumonia, all of the scientists started to pool all of their resources, and they only started to focus on COVID-19 vaccines, the majority of the scientists. In addition to which, companies weren't asked to provide the money. Instead, governments, such as the government of the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, governments said, you don't have to worry about the money. We will provide you the money. All that we need you to do is to work as fast as possible to make sure that you can get the vaccines as quickly as possible. If we waited 10 years for a COVID-19 vaccine to be produced, as an example, what it would have meant is that everyone in the entire world will probably already have been infected with the virus, would have already developed immunity, and you probably wouldn't have that much of a need for a vaccine. So yes, people do develop protection against the virus, against COVID-19, after they've been previously exposed to the virus. That protection is usually protection against severe disease and dying from COVID-19. So past infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19, does provide protection against severe disease. But the problem with that sort of an approach, waiting to be infected, is that in South Africa alone, as an example, the number of people that have died of COVID-19 is sitting at 250,000. That is much more than the number of people that we have recorded, because many people that have died of COVID-19 in South Africa have not been recorded. Had we waited longer before we started to introduce vaccines, it means that those numbers of people that are going to die will continue increasing. And the only way that we can start to minimize the chances of someone ending up in hospital or dying of COVID-19, the only sustainable way we can do it is through vaccination. We've got other type of measures that we can use. As an example, wearing face masks, avoiding overcrowding. Those are important measures, but they're not sustainable. People become tired about it. And usually people need to gather indoors, where there's poor ventilation. And unfortunately, those sort of situations lead to people being infected. And once people are infected, especially if they're above the age of 50 and 60, or if you've got other underlying medical conditions, when they get infected, if they don't have the protection which vaccines can provide to them, they might survive, but many of them will unfortunately go on to die. So we can't have that to happen. So like I said, what we've done and what I've been had the privilege of contributing to is really working how these vaccines work, whether these vaccines are safe, and if they are safe, how well do they protect against COVID-19? These vaccines protect very well in reducing the chances of someone ending up in hospital and dying of COVID-19. For many of the vaccines, the protection is more than 90% against ending up in hospital and dying of COVID-19. These vaccines work less well when it comes to protecting people from being infected with the virus or developing mild illness like a runny nose, like flu-like symptoms. When it comes to protecting people against infection and mild disease, especially with the variant that's currently circulating in South Africa, the Delta variant, the protection that these vaccines provide is only about 50%. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get vaccinated if you're in a younger age group and you're not at risk of dying of COVID-19. Because even a vaccine that only reduces your chances of being infected by 50% means that you're 50% less likely now to transmit that virus to someone else. And that someone else might be someone else in your house that's very old, that the vaccine might not provide complete protection, so they still remain at risk of becoming infected and developing severe disease. And when we look at the sort of domino effect of one person having a 50% lower risk of transmitting the virus, with a domino effect, large numbers of additional infections are prevented just by one person having a 50% lower risk of being infected with the virus. So like I said, the reason we develop vaccines is not to harm people. The reason we develop vaccines is not to change the DNA of people and to make them to mutate. The only reason we've ever developed vaccines, and the main reason why we use vaccines in humans, is that because vaccines essentially are there to protect us from developing severe disease. Vaccines are there to try to reduce our chances of dying because of being infected with a germ. What we've had in the past, as an example, I mentioned the examples of South Africa each year, where 7,000 fewer children are dying because of pneumonia and diarrheal disease, runny stomach. Because the children are vaccinated as young infants at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 14 weeks, we religiously take our children to be vaccinated because we know, we've seen from the past, that vaccines save lives. They've saved the lives of children. Many of us that are listening in on this, we might not have been around had we not been vaccinated as children, because many of us might actually have died of measles, of pneumonia, of diarrheal disease. What has happened globally is that a number of children that used to die, as an example, in the year 2000, was close on to 12 million children throughout the world, of which about half of those children died just in one continent, in Africa. The number of children that now die each year is about 5.5 million. Still about half of them die in Africa. But the reason for that big difference between 2000 and 2020, 7 million fewer children dying, one of the major reasons for that is because vaccines each year save about 2 million children, of which 1 million children are probably on the African continent, from dying, because they've been protected against germs which otherwise would have killed them, and especially would have killed them in places that they've got very limited access to healthcare facilities. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and over to you.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to come back to you again, but what I'm hearing you saying is that you have done the studies and you are saying that from the research that you have conducted, this vaccine, particularly here, because we're talking about the COVID-19 vaccines, these vaccines, they do prevent hospitalization, they do prevent people from developing severe symptoms when they are affected by this coronavirus. I'm just trying to simplify it for somebody who is just sitting at home, for a lay person who is listening to you right now.
Absolutely correct. And again, just to emphasize that they do those things, in addition to which, what our studies also show is that they are safe. They're extremely safe.
Okay, we're going to come back to that because we have got those questions that come from people who say, how safe are these vaccines that are being injected into our bodies? There are those questions that are coming, and there are those people who are saying, but I know of my relative who took the vaccine and they are sick right now, or they passed on. Let me pass now and go to Professor Berishop so that we can also hear from him what his contribution is to this work of virology, this work of vaccines that is being done in our country today, that is affecting the whole world. Professor, welcome to you, and over to you. Let us hear from you. Here we are, educate us.
Thank you very much, Pastor Mukhuba. Good evening to you. Good evening to the Apostle. Thank you very much to Unity and Blessings Network. Thank you for inviting me. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Special good evening to Dr. Muthambi, who's a former student of mine. It's lovely seeing you again and hearing from you again. Just to give you a little bit of a background where I come from, I'm trained as a medical virologist. I was the former professor of virology at University of Witwatersrand. And I was also the first director of the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, the NICD. In fact, Professor MADHI followed me as a second director. My background really is in medical virology, where I have been in for about 30 or 40 years. I can't remember now, many, many years. I actually since have retired, but have been brought back with the onset of the corona pandemic. So my present role at the moment is that I chair the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID vaccines. We like to abbreviate it as the VMAC for short. And the VMAC has been in existence since the end of August, September last year. So it's just on a year in existence. So in that time, we've put together 37 advisories. And I'll come just now what an advisory is. We consist of 19 members. These are 19 experts from around the country with expertise in a variety of disciplines related to COVID-19. So there are virologists, there are infectious diseases specialists, there are epidemiologists, there's ethical and ethicists, and so on. And also people involved in the actual manufacture or distribution of vaccines. So it's 19 members. There's the secretariat, who are also professionals of 5. And this really forms basically a core group who advise the minister. As the name implies, the Ministerial Advisory Committee was set up to advise the Minister of Health and, of course, the Director General in the Department of Health on issues related to COVID vaccines. So this core group then meets on a regular basis, and also attached to the core group are various technical working groups which look at various particular issues, particular problems, particular questions related to COVID vaccines. And the technical working group will also consist of experts outside the VMAC, expertise, for example, the Cochrane Group, who assemble literature and knowledge from a variety of sources. They're part of the Medical Research Council. NEMLAC, which is the National Essential Medicines List, who have got a lot of expertise in evaluating, in their case, drugs, but also vaccines. And as I say, we've put together these 37 advisories. The advisories really they are the property of the Minister of Health. They are, the group, the committee, really reports to the minister on various vaccine issues. So the advisories are at the minister's discretion to publish it or not. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them have been published and are in fact in the public domain on the Department of Health website. And in there you can actually see the background to where the advisories were made, why they were made, and also the actual recommendations which come from them. So these recommendations then look at issues such as vaccine choice, such as vaccine strategies, such as the ages of who should be vaccinated, such as vaccine requirements for various and under situations, and so on. Maybe in the question time we can go into a little bit more detail. So I think I'm not going to go into more. I think I'll stop here. I think it gives you some idea of what the VMAC is, what my role in the VMAC is, and I'll leave it there for questions and discussion. Thank you, Foster.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor. So I understand that your role is to advise our government on what to do regarding this issue of the issue of vaccines. You are playing a role there with regard to what we are facing today. And here is the professor with us tonight. I can see that you are sending a whole lot of questions, and they are going to respond to your questions. We are going to pose them just now. Before we do that, we are going to go to Professor REES, the lady who is chairing the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, known as SAHPRA. And as I said before, probably some of you have never heard of them up until now, because COVID-19 is bringing to light many things that people did not know about. They are the ones who do the approvals of these vaccines that we're talking about. So the professor is here with us to educate us on what they do, because I know that last week when we were with the MECs, you were asking questions like, are these vaccines approved? Are they vaccines, or are we still on trials? Are we still on experiments, or they are already approved, these vaccines that are being given to people? We have got Professor REES with us. Professor REES, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Mukhuba and Apostle, and to all the listeners to the Unity and Blessings Network. Thank you so much for having this session. And you're quite right. Many people had never really heard of a drug regulatory authority. In South Africa, it's called SAHPRA, but just about every country in the world has a drug regulatory authority. And if you stop and think about things for a moment, I think we take for granted that we can go into a pharmacy and get a cough mixture or some paracetamol, or that we can go into a hospital and have an operation and be given an anesthetic and be given antibiotics, or that we can go to a GP and get treatment for our children. And we take for granted that those medicines we're getting are safe, that they do what they say they are going to do, and that they're manufactured properly so that they're of good quality. And it's important that we can take that for granted, because just think for one moment, if that wasn't the case, the next time you got sick, you would be wondering, what is this tablet I've been given? What is this medicine I've been given? And if you take your children to have a vaccine, you'll be asking, are these vaccines safe? So we are very lucky in South Africa that we have had for many years a very effective drug regulatory authority, now called SAHPRA. It's been called SAHPRA for just 4 years. Before this, it was called the Medicines Control Council. So that means that you can go and get medicines, and you can have vaccines in the knowledge that they're safe and they're going to work in the way that they say they are. So when we look at a new vaccine, what are the sort of things that we look at? And I'm going to pick up on some of the things that Professor MADHI said. So if our job as the regulator is to say, is the vaccine safe? Does it work? Is it good quality? What are we going to look at? Well, the first thing we're going to look at is all of the information and the evidence that has been generated through that development process. All of these vaccines would have started off in the laboratory, not with people. They don't start with people. They start in the laboratory, and scientists who are laboratory scientists will test ideas that they think will work to develop a vaccine. And there are ways that they do this in the laboratory that start to indicate whether or not this product has the likelihood of being an effective vaccine. Once they see that, they will then test that vaccine in what we call animal models. And it depends on the kind of vaccine that you're looking at as to which animals you test the vaccine on. And in the case of SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus, things like hamsters are used, or different types of monkeys can be used as well. So a variety of different animals, and we test to see in those animals whether it looks like these vaccines are going to work. And only when we're happy that the vaccines look like they might work and they're safe, both from the laboratory and the animal studies, do we go into those kinds of clinical studies that Professor MADHI described. And first of all, there's a small study where we check safety again and the dose that we require. And then there's a slightly bigger study where, again, we test safety and we look at the dosage and we start to say, does it look like this vaccine is going to work? And then these huge studies that were just described, 30, 40,000 people, where we're then asking the question, does the vaccine work and is it safe in those people? So all of that information is then presented to the Drug Regulatory Authority, and we look at all of that evidence. In addition, though, we also need to make sure that the product that you get is of good quality. And that means that we go right back to where it's manufactured. Even if the manufacturing site is in another country, we will either go and inspect that site ourselves as SAHPRA, or we'll work with groups like the World Health Organization to see whether that manufacturing site is of a good standard and has all the quality standards in place that give us confidence that this is going to be a good product. When all of that is ticked, the regulator for these COVID vaccines will then say, and at the moment we're saying it's emergency use for most of these vaccines. So in the first instance, we said it's a pandemic, we'll approve it for emergency use. We will then say, is it suitable for emergency use? And if it's suitable, who's it suitable for? Many of these early trials have been done on adults, people over the age of 18 years. Many of the early trials, for example, didn't include pregnant women. For some of the vaccines, we don't yet have data on how effective and safe the vaccine will be for people living with HIV. So when we look at approving that vaccine for use, we also have to say, who is it safe for? Who is it indicated for? What do we now have the evidence for? But as the new evidence comes in, we also gather it together. So we got more evidence, for example, on pregnant women that allowed us to say you can use these vaccines in pregnant women. We're getting more information about the effectiveness of the vaccine and their safety in people living with HIV. And now we're getting more evidence and information about the use of vaccines in children. And as the regulator gets more information, so we're able to say, first of all, use in adults, then you can use it in this group, then you can use it in a wider group. And that's how the regulator works. But it doesn't stop then, because these are new vaccines and this is a brand new virus. They have to be new vaccines. It's because it's a new infection. So once we start to roll them out into the community, the other thing that SAHPRA does together with the Department of Health is that we monitor safety. Because remember, even though we've had tens of thousands of people in the clinical trials, we're now rolling these vaccines out to millions of people in South Africa, but worldwide. So we're looking all the time to see, is there something really rare that might be associated with this vaccine that we haven't seen in these clinical trials? And when we look at this, we've got to be able to decide if we see something happening. For example, clots, blood clots. If we see that happening, is that something that happens in, for example, people over 60 anyway, whether they'd had a vaccine or not? So we need to understand what are the kind of diseases that people in the community will have anyway, with or without a vaccine. Or is this something that could possibly be associated with the vaccine? And in South Africa, we have the Department of Health, we have a special ministerial committee that looks at it, and we have the Drug Regulatory Authority, SAHPRA, that also looks at these unusual rare events and says, could this be associated with the vaccine? And then with that data, we also look globally. So we share that data with the World Health Organization, and all the countries in the world are putting that data together. So if there is an unusual or rare safety signal, if there's a serious unusual safety signal from around the world, we will be able to detect it. And that is going on at the moment. So that safety monitoring is ongoing, and that is what we will be doing. So in terms of the reassurance that people have asked for, is this a vaccine trial? No, once we have said that we have approved this vaccine for use, it is no longer in a clinical trial. We do approve the clinical trials, but once we start to roll the vaccines out, these are vaccines that are now approved for use. And all of that monitoring that I've just described will be undertaken. And the companies that have applied to us are also asked to do their own monitoring and to report into the regulator very regularly. So if you put all of this together, what you can be assured of is that there's a proper process of review, that we look at the safety, quality, and efficacy and who the vaccine is suitable for, which populations, and we continue to monitor for safety, and we continue to monitor to make sure that the vaccine remains effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor REES. The professor is educating us on what they do as SAHPRA. We take it for granted when we go into a pharmacy. That is true. When we buy a cough mixture, we take it for granted. We don't even think about it that for that cough mixture to be there, there has to be some regulatory processes that go into it, into approving it. So their job is to approve whatever that is supposed to be given out there, dispensed out there for our use. So we do understand that they've got a very important role to play in the medicines that we receive out there. Otherwise, everyone will go and sell us whatever that they have developed without these proper checks, then we would die. Now, I know that when we're talking about the vaccines that are being rolled out now, there are those problems that people are having right now, questions that they are having right now of saying, okay, have you done a proper job in approving whatever? Are they approved or are they still experimental? Those are the questions that are asked every day. And I can see that there are many questions that are coming in, that are coming through. And I know that Apostle here, you do have some issues that you want to raise as well. I'm just going to read these questions and I'm going to give time to you as well, Apostle. And I'm also going to put up a video there that also points out things that people are struggling with. The problem today is that there is quite a lot of information that is doing the rounds. You go on websites, on the internet, you're going to find quite a lot of information that is confusing to a person who does not understand much about medicine. And we find that even the doctors themselves are speaking different language. Even the scientists themselves, they are presenting us with conflicting information, which is quite confusing for a person who is reading all this, who is listening to all this. So I've got somebody who's asking here that why is the South African government not being transparent with regard to positive cases, hospitalization and mortality of people who have been fully vaccinated? And when hospitals admit COVID-19 positive patients, how do they distinguish between fully vaccinated patients and not vaccinated patients for statistics purposes? So people are really concerned here, Apostle, about the studies that are being done and what is happening to people who are said to be dying because of the vaccines. Do we have proper statistics? Do we have proper reporting procedures on adverse effects of the vaccine? And somebody is asking this question that there are no reports of children dying of COVID-19. Why is the government running trials on children? If there are no reports of mortality amongst children, why is it important for our government to run trials on young children? I'm sure Professor MADHI will be able to address that one. And yeah, because it is not just one person who's asking this. And another person is asking, my question is it safe for people with comorbidities to be vaccinated? And if it is safe, why do they develop complications after taking a vaccine? And I think this one was also raised last week when we had the MECs here, because there was that thing that some people are reacting to these vaccines. They are developing adverse symptoms after that because they've got other conditions. So if that is the case, is it safe for certain people to take this vaccine? What is the education that is given out there to say that people with these conditions, such and such conditions, are not supposed to take these vaccines. Are people receiving this education when they go to vaccinate, or are they just registering and they go there, they receive the jab, and then they go back home and then they develop complications, and later on it is said that it is because of other conditions that they have been having? And I see Pastor Lucas says, how does a vaccine work in a person's body? And there is another question. My question is, if I once tested positive for COVID-19 and got healed, why should I get vaccinated? Because that means my immune system is strong. So we are talking about the natural immune system now. Are our immune systems unable to handle this COVID-19 disease, the coronavirus? And this one says the different virus took decades to be approved, and we cannot compare those vaccines with the COVID-1 with the other vaccines, and treatments for chronics took years to be approved after many trials. Then comes COVID vaccine that was approved with just few months. When did they have the trials? When did they have the trials? And I believe that this is the one that you spoke about before. It is what you said before. And somebody is asking, do you give pre-counseling before vaccinating people according to National Health Act number 61 of 2003? And before we go to the video, Apostle, you can just state what I didn't state here.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a follow-up question. To this one is to Professor REES. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I do have one or two questions here, seeking clarity. First of all, there is a director. I listened to a director sometime last year, towards the end of the year, when I remember President Trump was always speaking about the rush for the vaccines, that he is pushing the manufacturers to come up with a vaccine in a short space of time. And then there is this director. The reason I'm quoting this director is because he's a director of medical ethics at New York University. He said something very, very important. He said this. His name is Professor Arthur Kaplan. He said the average time to produce a safe vaccine is 20 years, and the shortest time a vaccine has been produced before is 7 years. Now, when he highlighted that, he was actually saying the people that think we can come up with a vaccine in a year's time or so, they are daydreaming. I'm talking about a director who's been there, and he is in the medical ethics. Those are the people that check the production of these vaccines over time. And he also mentioned another thing that caught my attention, and he said this. He said the flu vaccines that we have right now, they were developed and they were produced over a very long period of time. And they themselves are 40% effective with all that time period. Now, I want to ask this simple question to the professor, Professor REES. SHAHPRA, does SHAHPRA work independently of other bodies or other authorities internationally, or they are connected? The reason I am asking this is because the first vaccine that was purchased in the country, which was AstraZeneca, the one that came expired, AstraZeneca, I remember it was on a Friday. Actually, it was on a Saturday morning when I heard in UK, the body in UK said no, AstraZeneca vaccine is not good to be administered. And already it was in the country. And Sunday, a day after, Sunday, the Minister of Health came on the screens to break down the news that, okay, AstraZeneca, they've just discovered something. It's not going to be in use anymore. And then the whole talks about it being given to other countries and all of that. But to somebody who saw a body in UK saying no to this vaccine, and just less than 24 hours is asked. Now, when did SHABIR do their own checks? Did they just take the word from the international body and they did that? Number two, they are talking about now, I heard her, the professor said emphatically that these vaccines are approved. And I was listening carefully. And still asking, is she saying they are approved because SHABIR approved it, or they are hearing a body overseas that says we have approved these vaccines? And which vaccines are approved? Because the reason I am asking viewers at home and honorable professor is because, according to my knowledge, FDA, which is a USA body, has approved one vaccine out of all these vaccines. And that vaccine has just been approved, but I don't know if it has been licensed, because there is an approval and there is a license. I'm not speaking as an expert. I'm a layman. But if you're talking about approval, is it approved on just an emergency use? And what do you mean by emergency use? And please remember, I did ask in the beginning that let's simplify our terminology, because other things you might think we don't understand them, it's just the terminology. What is different from a trial, experimental, and emergency use? Is there any difference there? Because according to my knowledge, all these vaccines have only been administered on experimental use. They've only gotten what we call emergency use. Emergency use, it means that you can use them hastily under the circumstances. And now, I believe it was last month, in the month of August 20, if I'm not mistaken, it was 24th or 23rd of August. Then we heard the news that FDA has just now approved Pfizer. But now it is only in the USA, but I don't know if it has been approved here in South Africa.
In other words, you are asking if they are doing their own approvals, or is it dependent upon on what is coming from outside?
Yes.
I'm sorry to barge in. I'm going to come back to you. It's just that I need to give Professor MADHI this time to respond to the questions that are posed, because I understand that he has got another meeting shortly. Professor MADHI, if you can please respond to the questions that you had, not just from the apostle, even the ones that I read from our viewers.
Thank you, Pastor. And there were quite a few questions, so you might need to jog my memory. But I think the one that you specifically asked me to speak to was the use of COVID-19 vaccines in children. And why is it that vaccines are being tried out in children when children are at very low risk of either being hospitalized or dying of COVID-19? And I think it's an important question and a really good question to ask. So it is correct that children under the age of 18 are relatively spared from developing severe disease due to the virus, and very, very rarely do they actually die, including in South Africa. In fact, it's probably close on to maybe just 200 or 300 children that have possibly died of COVID-19 in South Africa. And the majority of those children that have died are children under the age of 6 months, in fact. And children with other underlying medical conditions. So why do we still need to vaccinate children? And I think my own perspective on this is that the vaccination of children is not a priority. It's not a priority in South Africa. It shouldn't be a priority anywhere in the world in the immediate future. Children should be vaccinated at some time in the future when we're trying to bring about significant lowering of the amount of people that are infected and that transmit the virus. Right now, where we are in South Africa and many other African countries and most other low and middle income countries, is that we haven't been able to get enough vaccines into the arms of adults who need it the most. We haven't been able to, even in South Africa, vaccinate more than 60% of people above the age of 60. Those people are much, much more likely to die than any other age group. We haven't been able to vaccinate sufficient number of percentage of people with other medical conditions such as obesity, overweight, diabetes, sugar sickness, high blood, etc. So until we're able to ensure that we're not going to compromise our ability to vaccinate adults, and especially adults above the age of 50 and adults with medical conditions, we shouldn't be focusing vaccinating on children. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start studies on children. Why do I say that? So when it comes to the virus, even though children don't end up in hospital or very, very rarely end up in hospital due to COVID-19, children are as likely as adults to be infected with the virus. And this is information from South Africa where when we tested for what we call antibodies, which shows us whether people have been previously infected or not, we showed that children were as likely to be infected with the virus. What we also know is that when it comes to who can infect who, usually it's adults that infect adults with the virus and children that infect children, but sometimes children can also infect adults. And that becomes especially a problem in many of our households where there's a grandfather, grandmother that is living there with their children and living there with their grandchildren. And if those other individuals in the house are not adequately protected, if children still are allowed to get infected with the virus, they can bring that virus into the household and end up infecting other people in that household. But right now, the main focus of the studies, and it's not government that does the studies, I just want to clarify that. These studies are done by scientists and the studies are approved by SAHPRA, but government doesn't actually do any of these studies. But the reason why the studies are being done is just to help us to understand how are these vaccines safe to use in children? And sometime in the future, when we vaccinate enough adults and we're still experiencing a problem of people dying of COVID-19, ending up in hospitals, then should we start considering vaccinating children? And we need to have that information now to be able to plan ahead. So I fully agree. This is not the time for South Africa or any other country for that matter to be thinking about vaccinating children against COVID-19, even though it's happening in some high-income countries, something that I totally disagree with at this point in time. But sometime in the future, it might be that we do need to vaccinate children. And when that time comes, we need to have the necessary information, which gives us a comfort in knowing that these vaccines will be safe when it is used in children. So that was the issue of why we're looking at COVID-19 vaccines in children. Another issue that you raised is that government is not transparent about the information that is shared, with regard to the number of people that are dying that are fully vaccinated. In fact, unfortunately, in a country such as South Africa and many other countries, we don't have good surveillance systems to be able to do what many high-income countries are able to do. Countries such as the United Kingdom, they can tell you down to the detail as to when someone has been vaccinated, whether they've had a breakthrough infection, and how long ago they were vaccinated. In South Africa right now, it's mainly the Western Cape, where we've been able to get some amount of information as to what percentage of people that are ending up in hospital have been fully vaccinated. And in the Western Cape, most recently, it's around about 5% of people that are ending up in ICU that have been vaccinated. The other 95% of people have not been vaccinated. We don't yet have that information from many of the other provinces, but globally, that is the common experience. And that common experience is that the vast majority of people that end up in ICUs, that end up dying of COVID-19, are people that have not been vaccinated. More than 90-95% of the people, on average, that are dying and going on or ending up in ICU, especially in countries that are rolling out the COVID-19 vaccines and have reached high levels of coverage in a population, those cases are usually in unvaccinated individuals. But it doesn't mean that even if you're fully vaccinated, and when we talk of fully vaccinated in South Africa, as an example, we mean 3 weeks after the Johnson & Johnson single dose or 14 days after 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. Unfortunately, there's a small percentage of people, especially people above the age of 70, and people with other medical conditions that suppresses their immune system, they still remain susceptible to even developing severe disease. The vaccine in that group doesn't provide 100% protection. It might provide 80% protection. So we are going to get a few people that unfortunately will still end up in hospital and die of COVID-19 even after vaccinated. But that number will be extremely small. Then a last comment, another issue that was raised is about safety of the vaccines and some people receiving a vaccine and then dying of COVID-19 or dying. Now, I think today SAHPRA released a statement where I think they've now investigated more than 80 individuals that were vaccinated that subsequently died, unfortunately. And when they investigated the clinical records of those individuals, the consensus was that none of those deaths were due to the COVID-19 vaccine. Some of those deaths were due to COVID-19 and other deaths were due to other underlying medical conditions. Now, what happens here? Unfortunately, what happens is that especially when people are being vaccinated at the time when there's a lot of virus circulating, what we showed in our studies way back last year is that 1 out of every 5 people that are being vaccinated at a time when the virus is peaking in its circulation, 1 out of 5 people, unbeknown to them, they're actually infected with the virus. And unfortunately, the vaccine doesn't get rid of the virus if someone is infected right at that point in time, but that infection can progress and that people can become ill and they can die of COVID-19. But it's completely coincidental that they were infected with the virus, they didn't know they were infected, they got vaccinated, and 2, 3, 4 days later, they end up in hospital with COVID-19. It's simply that they were already brewing the infection. The doctor spoke about incubating the virus. It can last for 14 days before it becomes symptomatic. And that is what happens in many of these people. Last but not least, should we be concerned about people that shouldn't get a vaccine? Are there any groups of people that shouldn't get a vaccine? The people that require the COVID-19 vaccine the most are people with medical conditions, especially chronic conditions, hypertension, high blood, sugar sickness, problems with the kidneys, people that are overweight. Those are the people that stand to benefit the most from COVID-19 vaccines because they are the people that are most at risk of dying of COVID if they're infected with the virus. So if there's anyone that we're wanting to vaccinate, it's those people with medical conditions. And unfortunately, some of them will go on to die. But those deaths that do transpire in those individuals is not necessarily related to the vaccine and extremely uncommonly related to the vaccine. Those deaths, unfortunately, might be because of COVID, because the vaccines don't provide 100% protection. Or those deaths, unfortunately, might be because of progression of the underlying medical condition. So let me pause there and hopefully I've managed to answer quite a few of the questions that were posed.
Thank you, Professor. But before you go, would you say that maybe we need to look at the issue of the relationship between these vaccinations with the blood clotting that people are talking about, the heart problems and also the neurological problems that we hear about? Would you say that maybe we still need some more time to study about that?
Absolutely. And in fact, we're doing that studies right now as we speak. We're doing the surveillance to see how common those conditions are. So let me tell you how common they are based on our other experience. So when it comes to these blood clots, which is not so much for the Pfizer vaccine, those blood clots are more a complication of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine. The chances of those blood clots happening in a person is in the region, for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in South Africa as an example, of the 500,000 healthcare workers that were vaccinated, 2 people developed those blood clots. So the chances of that blood clot is 1 out of every 250,000 people. The number of people that have died of COVID-19 in South Africa as of today is 400 for every 100,000 people, or 1,000 for every 250,000 people. That is the number of people that have died of COVID-19, 1,000 for every 250,000 people, and there's 1 blood clot for every 250,000 people that were vaccinated. Of the people that developed a blood clot, 1 out of 4 of them will unfortunately die. But this is with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. With the Pfizer vaccine, as an example, you don't have that as a complication. But with the Pfizer vaccine, that's another complication, which people need to be aware of. And that is sometimes it can cause what we call myocarditis, sort of inflammation of the heart, and especially in boys, and especially men under the age of 40. But the frequency of that also is extremely uncommon, in addition to which that is usually a self-limiting condition, in that the person might be ill for 2 or 3 days, might end up in hospital for 2 or 3 days, but they usually recover without any other complications. So yes, there are serious side effects of vaccines, but we need to interpret it in a context of how frequent it is compared to the benefits of vaccines. So in South Africa, in Johannesburg, as an example, the chances of being struck by lightning, is about 1 out of every 250,000 people as well. And that is the same chance of developing a blood clot. So it's extremely, extremely rare. It happens, unfortunately. It's something that we can't wish away. It happens, but we need to interpret it in the context of the benefits of vaccine, where in a country such as South Africa, again, to give you that number, up until this week, the number of people that have died for every 100,000 of the population is 400. 400 people have died for every 100,000 of the population.
Thank you, Professor. We would have loved to have you on the program for longer than this, because I know that there are still many questions coming, unfortunately. We will have to let you go now to release you, and we hope that next time when we invite you, you are going to come and be with us on our platforms. We appreciate your time very much. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Okay, there we go, Apostle. We are sitting with quite a number of questions, and the professor says yes, we still need to continue doing these studies, because people are saying, but yes, this is what we are hearing, that the vaccinations are safe. But on the other hand, I know of my neighbor who got vaccinated, and after that they collapsed, heart problems, this and that, and it's really worrying, and hence we find that people are hesitant to take the vaccine. So we are gonna go for the video now, and then come back to you, and after you have posed your questions, then we are going to go back to our specialists to respond and to wrap it up.
And listening to this, know that the first thing they ask in a mammography suite is, have you taken the COVID-19 vaccine, in which arm? And it's been thought that these changes are durable over the course of a year, that we really can't get to a stable mammogram for a year. But going from there, we've learned a lot. The Japanese were somewhat distrustful of the Pfizer application, and they demanded a biodistribution study asking, where do the lipid nanoparticles go? And through a Freedom of Information Act from Canada to Japan, we actually got the report, had it translated to English, had scientists verify it, and we were shocked to find out that the lipid nanoparticles actually distribute widely through the body. They tend to hyperconcentrate and in an accelerated fashion over 48 hours in the ovaries of these animals, and to a lesser extent the testes of the animals. So they go to an area we knew from prior studies from China called the corpus luteum, which avidly takes up lipid particles because it's making steroid hormones. But the shocking thing I'm telling your listeners is it looks like these vaccines do target the ovaries, and likely target the human ovaries over other tissues. We have an autopsy from an older man in Austria who died about a month after the vaccine, and so there was a chance to try to evaluate what in the world is going on, and we saw evidence that the vaccine in a mosaic fashion distributed to the brain, delivered to the heart, to the other vital organs, and it really fit with a pattern of toxicity and side effects that we've seen, where there's really into the brain, heart, the immune system, and the blood system because of the distribution of these lipid nanoparticles, and then the installation of the messenger RNA, production of the spike protein, which is damaging.
Right. Now you mentioned that the synthetic mRNA just keeps on producing the spike protein now.
We believe so. In a critical paper by Kyriakoulis and myself, this was carefully examined, and we know from the Ogata paper that the production of spike protein is at least for 2 weeks. It's measurable in plasma until it's mopped up by the second injection and the incipient antibodies that are produced. But we have no assurances that this messenger RNA is adequately broken down by RNases. It's possible that the messenger RNA is passed down during cell division to daughter cells, that it has longevity to it. We know that the gene transfer technology originally on the platforms was designed to last at least a month. Like some of the programs for Fabry's disease, heart failure, and cancer relied upon monthly injections, conceivably every 3-month or every 6-month injections. There's nothing that makes us think that these vaccines are just in the arm for a couple days. Everything we're learning about them is it looks like they have a prolonged effect in the body, and they clearly have a dangerous mechanism of action. The production of the spike protein is far and away the most dangerous and risky proposition that we've ever seen in human medicine for a widespread injection.
And yet this experimental drug has been pumped into populations around the world. And not only that, they're now talking about booster shots because of the efficacy of the original vaccines. What are your thoughts about these booster shots that they now want to pump into people's arms?
Well, we have the first case in point, which is the Pfizer vaccine. Now, Pfizer's 30 micrograms of messenger RNA, far different than Moderna, which is 100 micrograms of messenger RNA. So we would expect Pfizer actually may have less efficacy, and indeed it does. The Israeli Health Ministry has Pfizer's fully vaccinated efficacy at 39% coverage. Pure Neck and colleagues from Mayo Clinic in Boston have Pfizer at 42% coverage. The Imperial College, the REACT data set in the UK also has Pfizer roughly at 40% coverage. Now the Israeli government has accelerated boosters far earlier than a year. In fact, boosters is 6 months or so after the initial immunization. I can tell you any vaccine that doesn't have at least 50% coverage, vaccine efficacy, and can't last a year, that's considered a non-viable commercial product. It would be actually off the market. And we saw a historic regulatory malfeasance in the United States. Pfizer was rushed forward for approval, and it turns out in a closed meeting with no briefing booklets, without no public comment, no external advisory panel, Pfizer was not granted approval. They simply looked at the legacy data, so no data with Delta, but just off the legacy data, not good enough for approval. And BioNTech was separated out as a separate legal entity, potentially a separate medicinal entity. That product doesn't exist in the United States. That was given conditional approval with lots of regulatory demands in terms of studies of myocarditis or heart inflammation, one of the established injury patterns we see with messenger RNA vaccines. And what came out of that meeting on August 23rd was a talking point taken either to our president of the United States saying that Pfizer was approved, and that triggered a whole wave of ill-advised vaccine mandates. And it turns out Pfizer wasn't approved at all. As soon as we got the regulatory letters, we realized Pfizer was not approved. And in really an astonishing series of events, the person who signed the conditional approval letter to BioNTech, Dr. Gruber, she resigned. Her and another senior official resigned from the FDA. I can tell you the Vaccine and Biologic Products Division of the FDA, this is their world championship event. This is their signature event, a global vaccine program with a variety of commercial sponsors. And for two senior officials to resign in the busiest regulatory cycle we've ever seen, I think is really a sign to the world that something has gone very wrong in the worldwide vaccine program.
Absolutely. Now, let's look at the potential long-term impacts.
Okay, we'll stop it there. That is what I've been talking about, that there is quite a lot of conflicting information that is filtered down to people, so we don't actually know what is it that we are dealing with here. Apostle, I'm going to hand over to you to... Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Maybe let me just make it real quick so that we can turn it over to our experts to help us. I have posed the first question to SAHPRA, Professor REES. Maybe to add one more thing there. SAHPRA, how far are you with approving whatever approval that you are going to give to these other vaccines? Because I believe another contributor to this hesitancy is a lack of variety. We only have 2 vaccines right now. We have Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. What's the hold up with the Chinese vaccine, the Russian vaccine and the others? What's the hold up? The reason I'm asking that is because the truth is other people, they don't trust anything that comes from America because of some statements that have been mentioned by the likes of Bill Gates before. So I know many people have tried to brush them off and everything. So right now, many people, they don't have confidence in the vaccines that come from the West. So now to push the vaccine, I think it will help to have a wide variety. So what's the hold up with the other vaccines? And number 3, because that's question number 3, the issue of the waiver, or should I say the what you call the rights, because I believe that many manufacturers, or there are many people that wanted to manufacture, even manufacturers that come from Africa. Right now we don't have a vaccine that comes from Africa. Why don't we have a vaccine that comes from Africa? Because if there was a vaccine that comes from Africa, nobody was going to resist anything that comes from Africa. So I know that now those who are the patent holders, they don't want to surrender the rights, and we don't know what's going on. Maybe SAHPRA will say something on that one. And then I quickly move then to another point. I don't know whether this was supposed to be for Professor MADHI, but I wanted to ask about the treatments, because when he spoke as if a vaccine is the only solution. Besides a vaccine, there is no solution. And the reason I'm asking other means or other ways to fight this virus or this pandemic besides a vaccine is because we have heard of many other treatments and other medicines that have been there for more than 30, 40 years and off the counter, and they are very cheap. And we know that they can also be used as prophylactic. So that means as preventative. Which simply means you can use this medicine and it can prevent hospitalization, it can prevent serious sickness. But seemingly, even on mainstream media, you don't hear people talking about that. We have heard voices from other reliable physicians and doctors that are reputable, but as soon as they come up and begin to talk about these treatments, I'm going to mention a few of them. Hydroxychloroquine. What's going on with hydroxychloroquine? What's going on with ivermectin? And I know, right, locally in South Africa, we have doctors that have used these treatments on their patients. I'm talking about doctors that will tell you, I have treated more than 300 patients, and none of those patients died. Another doctor was saying, I treated over 150 patients, and none of them, some were in the ICU, and I started treating them with an ivermectin. But when you go and look for ivermectin now from the pharmacies and the places where they sell them, you won't find them because they've been removed from the shops. Is it something that was done deliberately to only focus on one option, which is a vaccine? And now if we do that, we are going to have a problem, because there are other people who have adverse reactions to vaccines. Now, I know about my wife. My wife, before this whole COVID thing, she used to go for your normal flu vaccines. And I remember it's been more than 3 times. She attempted more than 3 times to get the shot. And every time she did, it had real serious adverse reactions until I said, no, you can't continue taking vaccines. It means you react badly to vaccines. Now, if she reacted to a normal flu vaccine, which took long to produce, how about now something that has been done in this way? And another thing as well, probably it's a question I'm posing. Is it true that this, what you call this messenger RNA technology used by Pfizer, it's the first time it has ever been used in a vaccine? Or should I say this, this technology that was invented by, I believe it's Dr. Malone, it's the first time it has ever been used on a vaccine. So these vaccines is the first time the vaccines are produced using that technology. And maybe let me just give over to them, or maybe the last one, because I don't want to always come in, so that they can answer me on this one. The viral immune escape, because the viral immune escape, I believe, is exactly what was mentioned there in the video that we just watched. It's when now a virus escapes the immunity, because we are seeing people that are supposed to be fully vaccinated, they are catching the virus. And Dr. Fauci himself even said in USA not so long ago, he said, we now know as a scientific fact that a vaccinated person can transmit a virus to someone who is uninfected. So which simply means other people, they catch a virus after they are fully vaccinated. Is it because of this viral immune escape? How does a viral escape the immunity? And now please do comment about the natural immunity together with the safety measures that we used to have, which are non-pharmaceutic. Thank you.
Thank you, Apostle. Thank you very much. Yeah, the natural immune system that we have, is it not functional anymore in dealing with these foreign invaders? And also the therapeutic interventions that are already available, are they not effective with COVID-19 disease? These are questions that are being asked. And also, that is it true that when we come to the Delta variant, those who are vaccinated, they are transmitting it more than the unvaccinated? Hey, there are quite a number of things. And here we are seeing the world becoming divided into the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. We are seeing companies threatening their own employees, and we are hearing that there are other places like the USA that you are mentioning where clinics are risking not having nurses because of having to say that if you're not vaccinated, you cannot work here anymore. So, hey, this thing can work either way. It can be you lose your job or a company will lose employees. So, hey, we are really faced with something that we cannot really ignore. We have to talk about these issues. And as I'm going to be taking it back to our specialists, I'm going to encourage those who are on Facebook, share the broadcast some more, as our specialists are going to be responding. Those of you who are on UBN TV, you can still alert others to come online just to hear the responses from our specialists, because I mean these are very important questions that everyone has and people are asking themselves, and hence we see that there are people who are reluctant to go and get vaccinated, like what you said with the boosters. Then it raises questions of efficacy. Exactly. Are we really talking about something that is effective here, and is it sustainable if really people are going to be vaccinated time and again? And they will have to get
every
year. Every time,
thing,
every 6 months.
The effectiveness of this thing, it only lasts for 6 months.
Another example that comes to mind is your Israel example. Israel got most people vaccinated, and now Delta came and they got infected, most of them. That is when we started hearing that it's not that you're not going to get the virus, it's just that you're not going to end up maybe in ICU, in a ventilator. So it is like really there is quite a lot that still needs to be answered here. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Muthambi, your response to the questions posed, and also when you are doing that, also give your closing comments after giving it, the responses that you would want to give to the viewers and to the questions that are posed. Over to you, Doctor.
In Austria, so there was a chance to try to evaluate what evidence
investigated. So with the AstraZeneca, the one that was returned during the second wave in January, that we did not use to vaccinate on our people, had several side effects, and these were also shown. The side effects were the clotting and the thinning of the blood. So this happened at the same time. So it's called thrombotic thrombocytopenia. So there's blood clots and blood thinning at the same time. And there's a lot of evidence that was shown and documents that were published, and especially in the European Medicine Agency, they have that. It's very clear, anyone can access it. And they had shown also how to manage these conditions, how to identify these conditions as well. And they also elaborated and also mentioned that the benefits outweighed the risk. So it's very important that we identify the cases if there are any side effects. Usually I get calls and I encourage people that they must go and report all these side effects at their nearest hospital or their nearest clinic. We have what we call breakthrough infections. Breakthrough infections, it's when someone has been vaccinated and they end up getting the infection, meaning they end up getting COVID-19 and disease. And this happens 14 days after they have completed all the recommended doses of the vaccine. In South Africa, we have J&J, it's 1 dose. And also we have the Pfizer, which is 2 doses. Why do we have dosage differences? As the studies are being done, they also measure the immune response, the antibodies, and the T cells. I'll get into that just in a few minutes. And when they measure that, they also are able to see that if you give 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson, how much is the efficacy? If you give 2 doses, how much is the efficacy, or how are the antibodies produced? And at the same time, they also check for the qualities of the antibodies, which is the durability of the antibodies. How long does this antibody last? Are they protective or not? So before I can proceed to the immune response, I just want to read something that is there on the European Medicine Agency. And
Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, you're going to be interpreting it in English.
No. English. It's exactly what Prof. Madhi was saying, but with more other information. So they also put it clearly that
because our viewers won't understand.
Like saying speak English, don't speak virology, because I get excited and get carried away at times and want to just talk virology. So putting the risk into content is that 1 in 250 people vaccinated with AstraZeneca vaccine will develop a clot. There is a way to manage that. there's a way to identify that. It's not just a normal clot that you get from maybe deep vein thrombosis. This is an autoimmune response. It's like the body fighting against itself, and it's very rare. Secondly, they also mentioned that 1 in 2,000 women will develop a clot from the oral contraceptive pill. They continue and elaborate and mention that 1 in 1,000 people a year will develop a clot from air travel. And these figures are what is the evidence that is out there. So it's very important to make informed decision. That's what comes with responsibilities. But we must also look at the whole general picture, not just choose one thing. Now, how do we identify cases of I'll start with the positive cases, because there are many laboratories that are testing, whether it's the NHLS, which services the government, or the private laboratories. There are many private laboratories. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the bigger names, which I will not mention at the moment, but even the smaller labs are also testing. So since last year, since the testing started, the NICD has developed a method in which it's an IT program such that for every test that is done on COVID-19 in all of those laboratories, it's linked or it feeds back the data into their system. Hence, we're able to say maybe this much tests were done in private, this much tests were done in government, here's the positivity rate, the numbers are increasing or the numbers are decreasing. So with that, they also monitor the cases which have been documented. We know when those who are vaccinated, when you go and vaccinate, they take your details, your ID number, they ask you questions, there are forms that are filled, they log into some of their system in the computers. So some of those also feeds back. I must admit that we need to improve on surveillance, which is correct, and each and every province has the team that is working to investigate all reported cases, especially of those who died. Now, there is what we call breakthrough infection. I'll just quickly go back to that. These are the infections that occurs even when someone has fully vaccinated, and I've already explained what fully vaccinated is. In the US, they have a lot of details, especially on the CDC website, where they just, because there were several cases of breakthrough infection with mild disease, they started focusing on the hospitalized ones and the ones that have died. And they have realized that it amounts to less than 1%. And most of those are mild disease. And in South Africa, from the information that the NICD has on their website, it's easy for anyone to access, is that in South Africa, they found that severe disease is about 4%, 2%, and of those who have been vaccinated, and majority of the percentage is those with mild disease. I was vaccinated. I did get COVID in July. Unfortunately, I work in an environment where COVID is a high risk. You know, I'm handling samples and all that. But I was never admitted. I have several comorbidities like hypertension, obese, if you can just tell, and I'm on treatment that makes my body to be immunosuppressed. I'm not saying what happened to me is what will happen to everyone. Obviously, different people react differently to different medication. There are people who are allergic to penicillin, a simple drug that is used to treat a whole lot of things. And some of them, the allergy reaction they will get can also be fatal. So regarding the flu vaccine is a dead virus. And what makes people sick is usually the immune response. I've spoken about two arms of the immune response. I talked about the army. Look at one that is non-specific, as if it's the army. that protect the land, and look at the specific one that produces antibodies as if it's the Air Force. These two arms of the immune system are very important. What usually makes you have flu-like symptoms, your fever, your headache, your tiredness, your body pains immediately after vaccinating, it's because of the first arm, the non-specific one. It's kicking in and it's identifying that a foreign object or a foreign protein is in your body, and this is how it has to work. Unfortunately, several people might have mild symptoms or severe symptoms. Others will not even have one single symptom, and they will just continue normally. And people are different, their bodies respond differently. With the flu vaccine, it's a dead virus. We usually refer to it as an inactivated virus. It doesn't mean if you react to the flu vaccine, you will react to the COVID vaccine badly or the hepatitis B vaccine badly. It's important to know how these different vaccines are made. With the flu vaccine, the virus is literally grown in chick embryos, meaning in the little eggs. And as the virus grows, obviously it will have part of the proteins of the eggs. And majority of the people who are allergic to eggs will react badly to the vaccine. Usually those who just react, just like with some of the people reacting to COVID, the symptoms will not last more than 3 to 5 days. But at the same time, it doesn't mean those rare cases that are there should not be reported. Hence, it needs to be investigated. How does the vaccine work? That was one of the questions. I have explained how the virus behaves, right? And how the virus induces an immune response, which is two arms of the immune system. And with the virus, with the vaccines, we usually focus on the other arm of the immune system, just because it has memories. I've talked about antibodies being specific, going to the specific targets, and making sure that when it encounters the same enemy or the same virus in future, it will remember. Now, the antibodies, these are the ones that are making sure that they are able to respond when you get infected. Hence, it has been documented that majority of patients or people who have been vaccinated and they get breakthrough infections, their viral load on the throat, where I mentioned that the virus, that's where it replicates when it enters the cells. And this is where the swab is usually taken, either from the mouth or the nose, because we want to look for those DNA genes of the viruses. So
Doctor,
okay.
If you can wrap up quickly, Professor SCHOUB is about to leave. We want to hear from him as well before he leaves.
Okay. So with those vaccines, they notice that the viral load in the throat in patients who have been vaccinated is very, very low compared to someone who is not vaccinated. And again, the mutation of the virus, the one that I mentioned, is the one that continues creating variants. So in people who are vaccinated, if they're not shedding the virus the same way as people who are not vaccinated, it can reduce transmission as well. Last but not least, there was a question about immune escape. Immune escape, it's simply the mutations that I've mentioned. I said some of the mutations make the virus stronger, others, they work against the virus. And with AstraZeneca, in the beginning, the reason that it was stopped during the second wave, it's because we could see some of the mutations, escape mutants, that does not allow the antibodies to control the virus, a process that we call neutralization. My advice tonight is that make an informed decision. There is a lot of issues that are being discussed, a lot of evidence, and sometimes it's difficult to pick which ones. Try and go into the journals of medicine, and also try and look at the WHO, CDC, and the NICD. The NICD is always publishing evidence-based information that is associated with our South African population. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We will have Professor SCHOUB and his response and concluding remarks, and after that, then it will be Professor REES also concluding. We don't have much time left now, so we're going to be rushing to wrap up the program. Professor SCHOUB?
To the president about vaccine passports. He sits in
the advice with regard to vaccine passports.
Yeah,
okay. Professor SCHOUB, are you with us? Is he muted? Oh, thank you. There he is.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, your responses to the questions that were posed and your concluding remarks. And the apostle also said that we would want to hear from you because you are advising our president, you are advising the ministers, this vaccine passport. That is what we are saying, Apostle. Exactly. What the vaccine passport is about.
We all heard it, Professor, from the president yesterday in his address. He said they are busy now working on the vaccine passports, and we know that any decision they take is also coming from your advices that you as the body feed him. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it is it's a fairly controversial issue, the issue about, first of all, about mandatory vaccines. In other words, that you'd have to show proof of vaccines if you need to be employed, or if you need to travel, or if you need to be admitted to sporting events and so on. And I think the issue is it's a difficult one because in some ways we treasure from our constitution the right to refuse treatment and the right to that our body is our own property and we can't be forced to do things that which are against our will. That is true. I think the one issue that we need to take into account is that an infectious disease like just COVID does have other implications. Sure, I think that no vaccine is mandatory in this country. That's the bottom line. You can choose to be vaccinated or you can choose not to be vaccinated. The only thing is that if you're not vaccinated, you choose not to be vaccinated, there are consequences. The consequence, of course, as has been showed very clearly tonight, are to yourself because you're not protected against a disease which is potentially fatal, or if it's not fatal, can cause long-term various serious consequences, and you're not availing yourself of a means to protect yourself against that. That's the one issue. But the other consequence is that you also are making yourself a source of infection to other people, that you will be able to transmit the infection to other people. Now, I know we have said that the vaccines are not 100% effective in preventing transmission, but they are very good. They are very good. They do reduce very substantially, and it's been shown in many, many studies, household studies, other studies, that people that are vaccinated are far less likely to transmit the infection than people that are unvaccinated. Now, if you take an extreme example, you can't expect that people who are working in a facility for elderly people, for frail elderly people, that they can't be expected to be vaccinated. Because if they are not vaccinated, they're going to pass the infection and maybe even cause an epidemic with fatal results in people that are very vulnerable. And the same would apply to healthcare workers. And the same would apply to any other occupations where people can transmit the infection to others. So there is a very strong case to be made for mandatory to expect people to be vaccinated in certain occupational situations, certain work. Now, if people elect not to be vaccinated, they must realize that the consequence of those consequences and that they can't be employed. Now, I know it's a harsh thing because then we create unemployment, which is very harsh. But on the other hand, to transmit to somebody, an innocent person, a disease which is potentially fatal is obviously, I think anybody will agree, from a human rights perspective, is a very much more consequential issue. And I think that's where the mandatory vaccination comes in. And to kind of verify that a person has been vaccinated, we need some kind of proof. At the moment, it is a paper-based, as you know, when you get vaccinated, you get a card. And the government is investigating a more streamlined way, perhaps electronic for those people that do have electronic facility like a smartphone and so on, or maybe other means of verifying that you have been vaccinated. But I think that's the background to, it's called vaccine passports, because I think it originally came from the vaccine requirement for travel. That if you do now, you know, up to now we've had mandatory requirements for international travel. If you travel to a yellow fever endemic area, you have to be vaccinated against yellow fever. That is mandatory by international law. We as medical students had to be vaccinated against hepatitis and rubella. We weren't asked, we were just told. And the reason is pretty logical, because if you're a healthcare worker, you don't want to first of all, you're liable to get infected, but you're also liable to pass on the infection. And I think this is in the same kind of vein. I hope that has explained it, Pastor and Apostle.
And I can real quick.
Okay.
Pastor Mukhuba and the guests, I just want to comment on this thing about the passports, because it is a burning issue. You see, the wording, it's what is alarming. Like now, the professor is talking about the certificates for your yellow fever and all of that when you are traveling to some other countries. But those are never called passports. Once you start mentioning the word passport, to us, you are reminding us about your dome pass. It's more serious than a certificate. That means now it's taking some liberties from us. And that is what is raising eyebrows everywhere now, because it's not just a certificate, okay, in certain sectors, as the professor is alluding. But now I'm concerned about this passport, and I heard clearly from the president, he did not even say a vaccine proof, vaccine certificate. He said a vaccine passport. That means people that are not vaccinated, which we will always have people that are not going to be vaccinated, either because of adverse reactions to a vaccine or something like that. Is this thing a clandestine communication about? Because before, the president said to us, no one is going to be forced. But you cannot say we are not forced when we are told it's either you do this, like now a minister of sport was saying, you're not going to be able to even go and watch football. If you are not vaccinated, then stay at home. We have heard that from the ministers. So this is not just about certain places like your places of elderly people and stuff like that. Probably the professor might help us. Maybe they're going to develop this passport. It's going to be in a paper, developed into probably a certain app on a cell phone. Is there any possibility that it can even be developed into a chip?
There we go. Yes.
Pastor. No, I do understand the apostles, particularly the sensitivity of the word passport, that it does convey a lot of negative connotations. Do understand that, and maybe it's an unfortunate maybe a verification or a certificate. But I think that I do understand that it does cause a negative reaction because of the compulsion, because there's a certain amount of legal compulsion about it. But unfortunately, I think an infectious disease is something which is different. You know, there wasn't the same kind of negativity about wearing a seatbelt, for example, and that it is legally, one is obliged to wear a seatbelt, which is really only for one's own protection. The vaccination, we cannot get rid of this pandemic unless we have the great majority of people vaccinated. That is the reality. And if there's a significant number of people don't get vaccinated, we will always have this pandemic with us. We will then have people going into ICU, and we will have people dying from the disease.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us tonight. We really appreciate. And I'm just going to hand over to Professor REES. Unfortunately, we are about to end the program, and most questions that were asked were directed to you, Professor REES. So if you can just respond quickly and also do your closing comments when you finish. But I understand that many of the questions were directed to yourself, or rather your... Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Look, these are questions that are indeed very topical, and you're right that these are hot topics and we do need to discuss them. So let me first go, I'll just pick out some of them that have come to me. The speed was asked. And now we have been very worried in the global public health world for many years, and I've been involved in various vaccine committees, the World Health Organization, various other international structures for many years. We've been very worried about the emergence of a pandemic virus. And what we have now is exactly that. And what a pandemic means is that this is an infection that rapidly sweeps around the world and affects most of the countries. And we always thought it would be respiratory, that it would be spread through the lungs and the nose and the mouth. And so because of that, we have been planning, there's been a lot of investment in the development of vaccines that could either address some of other infections that we thought could cause a pandemic in the future, or what we call a platform for a vaccine. And what a platform is the sort of the base of a vaccine, into which, if you get a new virus, you can take a little bit of that virus and almost plug it in. And that's what we need with a pandemic, because we haven't got time to go through 20 years. Can you imagine, as Professor MADHI said, how many people would have died by now if we hadn't got the vaccines? So we were able to take other vaccines that we've already developed for other diseases and use their backbone and quickly change them, but also these platforms that have been invested in precisely because we were worried about the emergence of a pandemic virus. And because of that, we were able to do things quickly, but we also did things quickly because instead of having breaks between the laboratory and the animals and the clinical studies, we overlapped things. But nothing was missed out in this development process. Every single step was in place, but that explains the speed. And in fact, what we're going to find in future is that will change the way we develop vaccines in future. They will be more rapidly developed because we've got the technology and we've learned through this process. But remember, no step has been left out, and everything that a drug regulator requires has been offered to it in the vaccines that have been approved. The second question is, are we working with other regulatory authorities? And we certainly are. We work extensively in networks in the African region, but we're also working with the World Health Organization that's also evaluating vaccines. So there's a lot of exchange of information, but the question was, does SAHPRA do its own reviews? And it does. The reviews, the technical reviews, are led by the Chief Executive Officer of SAHPRA. She is legally responsible for making the final decision, but she doesn't do this alone. She has teams of people within SAHPRA itself who are the staff and the experts within the organization, but also teams of experts drawn from academia and put onto committees that advise her and the other staff. They all work together, they look at the data together, and then there is a collective decision, but the final decision goes to the CEO of SAHPRA. But that there is extensive work done by SAHPRA, but extensive exchange of information with other regulatory authorities. And internationally, that's the way to go these days. Regulatory authorities are really talking to each other, including within our own region. And then the question was, have we only approved? No, we've approved 3 vaccines so far, which is the Pfizer, the J&J, and the Sinovac. I think sometimes there's a confusion between what SAHPRA does and what the Department of Health does. SAHPRA approves things. It is then up to the Department of Health to decide whether the vaccines that are approved are suitable for the program. So we've approved 3. Pfizer, J&J, and Sinovac. Sinopharm, and Sputnik, and other vaccines are also in the pipeline going through approval. But as I said, there's a lot of information that's required, particularly in manufacturing, that needs to be looked at. And so there's a lot of discussion backwards and forwards with the applicants for these vaccines, but 3 have been approved. And you were saying one of the questions was, well, do we need different types of vaccines? Indeed, you're quite right. I think we do. And all those 3, the Sinovac, the Pfizer, and the J&J, are different, what I said were platforms. They are different constructs of vaccines. And that's an advantage to have these different types of vaccines, because in the future, we don't know what might happen and whether some vaccines might give us, say, longer protection or better protection than others. So having these different types of vaccines is an advantage. But remember, SAHPRA only approves. SAHPRA doesn't purchase. SAHPRA doesn't make programmatic decisions. That's not its job as a regulator. And the emergency approval is the preliminary approval to try and get things out the door as quickly as possible. But each of the products that has been approved are invited to continue to put more data in as they get it. So it's called a rolling review. So for example, if you get more data on the use of the vaccine in pregnant women or in children, the company can pull that data in and the regulator will continue to evaluate it and then be able to say extend the indication. And then lastly, your question was, why are we not manufacturing vaccines in Africa? Hit a nail on the head there. It's what it has shown is that our region has been almost without capacity, not quite, but almost without capacity to manufacture vaccines. We've got limited capacity here in South Africa, in Senegal, in Egypt, but very, very limited capacity compared to the rest of the world. And in fact, if there's good things to be said from this pandemic, one of them is that we're now demanding the ability to be able to manufacture our own vaccines, to not only manufacture, but also develop our own vaccines and manufacture our own vaccines. And in fact, there was a delegation from the World Health Organization visiting last week with the Department of Science and Innovation, precisely because they are now engaging with South Africa to assist it in becoming a vaccine manufacturing hub. But 100%, we need to manufacture these vaccines in our own region. And my parting words were very important, but a real appeal to everybody listening. These vaccines protect lives. They protect you from having severe illness and hospitalization, from the horrible effects of long COVID, which we're now recognizing is increasingly common, much more common than we thought. And they'll protect your families and your communities. Our appeal is to everyone, if we want to get back to a new normal, if we want to go back from where we are now, we're going to have to be vaccinated, and vaccinated at a much higher rate than we are now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for honoring the invite, and thank you for your contributions. And we appreciate that you availed yourself. Apostle, the professors have spoken, the specialists have spoken, the experts have spoken. Anything that you want to add there? Anything that you want to say to our viewers?
Pastor, thank you so much once again for the platform, for the opportunity. And your heart is clear. You want to help South Africa, the body of Christ, to equip us with all the information, with knowledge. I want to say this, just that the time is our limitation. There is so much we still wanted to hear from the experts. Things like your herd immunity, that it has been reached in other countries, which is the goal of every country vaccinating. At least they are, pushing towards herd immunity, because we believe if we can vaccinate people to that percentage, we're not going to have infections. We're going to come to some kind of a normal. But now those countries are not in the normal themselves, which we are taking from. But this is what I'm going to say as we are wrapping this thing up. As the body of Christ, we have, an advantage of knowing the times and the seasons. Spiritually, we can read the times and we know by revelation what time it is that we live in right now. So as you take a decision, what you are going to do, check the times. Number two, get all the information that you can get. Don't be impressed by people that are taking photographs and videos and they are saying it's a good thing. See, I have done it, so go and do it yourself. No, you must get information for yourself. And another question that unfortunately we come to this part of the program, it has not been clearly answered, is that old question of whether this is an experiment or what, because so much depends on that question. Because if this is an experiment, the subjects that are being experimented on, they really need to go and vaccinate based on the full information, what is called what is called consent that is fully informed. So everybody, you have a choice to make, but the body that you have is the temple of the Spirit of God. Whatever you are going to do, I want to say the words that Pastor Mukhuba said in the beginning, that if you don't know, you can't be against or you can't be for. So you can't support something that you don't know. You can't reject something that you don't know. So it's up to each and every one of us to equip ourselves even more and more. And when you know what to do, then take an action and go and do it. And I want to say with those words, may the Lord bless you. And thank you so much.
When you know what to do, that is when you're going to do it. And those are very important words from the apostle. They are words of wisdom. Child of God, you have heard it. And you, servant of God, the shepherd put over the sheep of God, you have heard that. That is not about being for or being against without knowing what this is all about. It is about you finding out what is this all about. And then when you have got that information, then you can be able to give proper advice. You can be able to educate those who are around you. And with regard to those who are leading people, because pastors have got many people who are under them, you cannot afford to be irresponsible. You have to be responsible. And this is something that we cannot shy away from. We cannot hide from this, because there are many people who are dependent upon us. One pastor might be leading quite a number of thousands and thousands, influencing millions of people. And being irresponsible and making statements that are not well informed can be very, very dangerous. From the discussions that we have had tonight, I can say that, Apostle, we still need to get into the issue of the mandatory vaccines. We need those who can be able to explain what is going on, because now it is making Christians to go like, hang on, are we not in Revelation now?
This is a sign
this is a sign. This thing of saying you are not going to be able to enter this place. I mean, with vaccines, everybody understands that vaccines have been saving lives for ages. And we all know that as Christians, we know that God heals miraculously, and God does use the doctors to help us. He uses different ways of healing us. And when the vaccines are introduced, of course, we're going to say, all right, we know that vaccines save lives. It's only when it becomes mandatory that each and every church person begins to say, have we arrived? Are we in the book of Revelation now? Are we now talking about these mandatory vaccines, that mandatory things, that if you don't have this, if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to buy, you're not going to be able to access certain services? Are we there? That is a topic of another day, and a very important one that we need to call those who are knowledgeable, those who know the scriptures very well, who can be able to help us with that. And I hope that we're going to have somebody from government to ask them, where is this coming from now? Because it's really making everybody to be concerned. It is an issue of another day. We're not going to get into that tonight. But otherwise, I want to say thank you very much for tuning in. I know that questions are still coming, and there are many. And this other one says people will start buying vaccine certificates. And in South Africa, I'm sure they are going to be very cheap. This is South Africa, and I'm sure they're going to be very cheap. And somebody says we still want to know the ingredients, and I think we need more information about this mRNA. We need, and the spike proteins. Exactly. We still need to understand those things. And some people are saying, okay, but don't force us. And I saw another one said this thing of mandatory vaccines is paternalism, something like that. And somebody says, I wish the government can do the same with cancer. Some provinces do not even have functional machines to help cancer patients, but we're seeing a lot of resources getting pumped into COVID-19 management. And another one says, according to SAHPRA, no one has ever died before or after getting their COVID jabs. Can this be proven, as we know people who are dying around us because of the vaccines? And if there are passports that are going to be granted to people, that means we are forced to take the vaccines. Yeah, it is a worrying thing, Apostle. We need to wrap up. It is a worrying thing because now people are getting divided. The nations are getting divided. The communities are getting divided. It is the vaccinated against the not vaccinated, and now it's like there is this group and that group.
I even saw a fight in another country.
A
fight on the street. I'm talking about a physical fight.
Because of vaccines.
Vaccinated and the unvaccinated fighting on the streets. That's how bad this thing is.
I saw another case that is interesting is one of divorce. A couple got divorced because of vaccines. The other one is refusing to be vaccinated. You know, we're laughing about it, but it's not a joke, really. It's very serious and it's very worrying. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we have to continue to learn. We have to continue to be educated. And as you know, tonight we're having professors. So professors, they lecture. They are very good in educating, and such discussions, they do take time. They are like pastors. You know, you give Apostle Makwati a mic, he's going to take forever. All right. And thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that you have gained some valuable information. And with the questions that you still have, we are still going to go and continue with this program, where we are going to be continuing with it, educating the nation, educating the Christian community on the things that matter so much, because I mean, we cannot run away from it. COVID-19 has affected us all. And there are people who are saying, but people were told that vaccinate and then you will go back to normal lives, and now it doesn't look like it's going to happen soon. So we are going to talk about these issues as we go on. And may the Lord bless you wherever you are, together with your family. May the Lord keep you safe. May He keep you safe even from coronavirus, in the mighty name of Jesus. May the Lord look after you wherever you go. May He look after your life, every area of your existence, because God has got the final say over our lives. He is the Alpha and the Omega of our lives. Continue trusting upon him. The one who has kept you alive up until today is still able to do that. Take care. Do whatever that is supposed to be done. Practice social distancing and wear your mask when you are amongst the crowds, and sanitize, wash your hands, and God will do the rest. God bless you. And from us here at UBN, it is bye-bye. Stay well with the Lord.